Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back to week 8. I can't quite believe it's got to week 8. We've been at this for 2 months, and thank you to all of you who've stuck with it. It's roughly about 13 to 15 people a week, and it's the same people, so I love you all very much for coming. Thank you. Really, really much appreciated. This week, as promised, we're going to be looking at process automation, and I'm going to start by talking you through the various different types of automation that we can complete within Salesforce, to give you an overview and like the differences and why you would choose some over the other. And then we're going to actually go through the quick start for process builder. We're going to build a very small process together. If we have time, we will look at approval processes as well, but I have actually earmarked that for Wednesday. So let's see how we get on there. Thank you very much, everybody. Hello, everyone who's just joined. I'm going to start by presenting my screen, and I'm going to open up my hands-on org. So you don't have to open anything just yet. I'll let you know when we're about to start doing that, because I want to just show you around a little bit first. So as you've seen in Salesforce, first of all, can you see? I think you can see my screen because I can see what's presenting. Yeah. So in Salesforce, we talked about several different, there are some really the most interesting parts of Salesforce, I would have to say, from what I think are the most interesting parts of Salesforce, and you're welcome to disagree with me. Formula fields, I really enjoy doing those, because it's really cool to see the right answer coming through what you've designed. It's quite motivating. I like doing page layouts, keeping them tidy, making pages look smart, and helping people to become more productive. But my other favorite thing to do is to make magical witchcraft happen inside the org, and we can do that with process automation. Automation is, remember last week I gave you a pop quiz and I said, what's the difference between formula fields and, which one was the odd one out? And you all chose formula fields, because whilst assignment rules, validation rules, and roll-up summaries are calculated when you change a record, formula field does not calculate when you change a record. Now, process automation also is also one of those things that fires when you save a record or update a record. Unfortunately, it doesn't fire when you delete a record, so just remember that. You can't make magical stuff happen when records are deleted unless you write some code to do it. Anyway, so I'm gonna quickly log into my org, and I'm gonna show you around a little bit before we dive into Trailhead. So typical use cases for process automation tend to be when you want to automatically do something. If you want to automatically have an email fire off, then you can do that with process automation. If you want to automatically create another record using data that's on the original record, you can do that. You can also use that process to set literal values into a field. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, that's if you wanted to create, let's say every time an opportunity goes to close one, you want it to automatically create a custom project object and set the start date to be the close date of the opportunity, set the type to always be project. That's what we would call a literal value. So the second one is what we would call a literal value, if you're always setting the same thing every time. That you can also run more complicated processes, which is called a flow. A flow is a way of actually daisy chaining multiple process automations together. So if you want them to fire off in a specific order and you want other logic to take place and be caught, and happen as a result of an automation, then you can use flow to do that. Something else you can do, you can also automatically submit a record for approval using process automation, which is particularly handy with things like a custom timesheet record, or having an opportunity go to a sales manager for approval before it goes to the next stage. Typical examples might be a discount approval process. And you can also run code as well. So if you've got very complex logic that maybe talks to another system, sends data to another system, waits for a response, and then uses the response to cause some other automation in Salesforce, then you can actually call that code using process automation as well. Any questions? Okay. So back in the olden days, and when I say olden days, I mean like 10 years ago, probably actually as recently as 6 or 7 years ago, there was really only kind of two main ways to, well, two and a half, because everyone was scared of Flow back then. No one would touch it, myself included. The main ways that you could automate, really automation is all about making stuff happen as a result of something else being changed. And the main ways that you would do that was using a method called workflow rules. Workflow rules are actually they're kind of they're a legacy feature now, but there is still one reason that people do sometimes use workflow rules, and that's if they need to send a SOAP message, an XML message using the SOAP API to another system. And you might get that in a typical, if you're trying to send data from Salesforce to a typical or a legacy on-premise, traditional on-premise system, then you might use XML to do that. And that you can use workflow rules to ping off, to create create an XML file that will then ping off to another system. I'm only gonna give a little bit of time to workflow rules because there are much better tools out there now in Salesforce that allow you to do it, but I just want you to be aware that they exist. So basically, the best thing that I can teach you around process automation is that it's a set of rules that you build, and those rules are follow a specific framework. And the rules that you build, once they're active, hang around in the system waiting for a record to be changed that meets its criteria. And once there is a record change that meets its criteria, then something will happen. And whatever happens is something that you can define. So if you were to create a new workflow rule, for example, and this is, remember, this is the old way that you would do things. The new way is much better. This was very, very limited. The things that you can do with a workflow rule include updating a field on the same object. They include sending an email automatically. They include setting a task, assigning a task to someone, generating a task and assigning it to somebody. And the other one is sending an outbound message. And the outbound message is the SOAP XML file that you can create. Now with Process Builder, which is the second and newer version of process automation, you can do a lot more. You can automatically generate other records. You can submit things for approval automatically. You have a lot more flexibility. But I think it's worth showing you workflow rules so you can understand the principles behind it. Before you start any kind of automation in Salesforce, unless it's a flow, don't worry about flows for now. That's for next week. You have to define which object you're going to run your automation on. So for example, if I was going to run a workflow rule on an account, for example, let's say I want to automatically set the account type to be a customer whenever an opportunity is closed won, there are certain things I'm going to need to do in order to do that. One is that I'm going to need to run the rule on the account object. And second of all is I'm going to need a roll-up summary field on my account to calculate the number or value of opportunities that are closed won against that account, because then I'm going to use that roll-up summary to drive my workflow rule. And this is where you have to have a good understanding of the data model as well. So knowing that opportunity is a child of account, so that when you change that opportunity, it becomes closed won, then your roll-up summary field on the account will calculate. And that causes a change, triggers a change to the account record, and therefore you can spin off any process automation that you want. So when you're thinking about these automations, you've got to kind of think about it bit by bit, just take each bit at a time. For example, there's a requirement that I need to be able to see, as a user, as a sales manager, I need to be able to see how many accounts of mine are customers, how many of mine are prospects, and how many of mine are inactive. So breaking that requirement down, as a consultant, I look at that and I go, okay, well, how do I know something's a prospect? Well, I've got a converted lead. So what's the process that I go through to convert that lead? And then I end up with like breaking it down into more sentences. So I need to be able to convert a lead so that I can track, you know, the fact that the account is a prospect. When it comes to the second part of that requirement is I need to understand which of my accounts are customers. Then you think about, okay, what's the process my user has to go through in order to ascertain that the account is a customer and not, you know, a prospect. So then you start thinking about, well, so we've got the type field on the account. That's the best place to record that it's a customer. How do we get that field updated? What's the easiest and you know, and most logical way to do it reliably? So you're thinking about data quality. If I make my users update the account type to customer, are they realistically going to do that when they're closing opportunities and they're ringing customers and they've got all this other stuff to do? They don't want to have to suddenly click onto another page and update the account type to be customer when, you know, why should they? So process automation is something I would consider in that case, because I'd be like, right, well, if, you know, depending on what my criteria are, it could be that there's been a closed won opportunity in the last year, therefore it's a customer. It could be that there's been a closed won opportunity forever and it's a customer. Once you have that business logic, you can design your automations around that. And I find it actually helps, once you know the features, is to take the requirement, like I say, break it up into bits, plot out how you would address each need, and then you start to build a picture in your head of, if I do this over here, then that happens over here, which then leads to this happening, which then leads to this report and this decision, and this system needs to know about this data. And you start to think in boxes, think architecturally about how you're going to meet those requirements. Have I just spent 10 minutes babbling, or does it make sense to everybody? Okay, everyone's quiet, so I assume you're all listening intently. Yay, mostly sense. Thanks, Kat. Always got my back. Yeah. So, okay, so in that instance, then, okay. So when you are creating when you're working with process automation, first of all, select the object you're going to be using. Second of all, obviously, as with everything in Salesforce, give it a name. Everything needs a name. Give it a description. And then you have to think about, when do I actually need to run this rule? And there is a reason I'm showing you this, because if I show you how to set it up the fiddly way, once you get to the process builder, you'll find it a bit easier to understand. This rule is where you can define as an admin, when do I run this rule? Do I run it when an account is created, bearing in mind that you've run it on the account object? Do I run it every time an object is created and every time it's edited? So like every time someone presses save, the system, you know, has to evaluate this rule and see if the record meets the criteria of the rule and then do what you tell it to do. Or do I run this rule whenever I create a record and or I change a record and it didn't meet the criteria before, but it does now? And then underneath is where you set your criteria. So here is when do I run it? And then what's the criteria when I do run it? So using the example of accounts, do we have sum of opportunities? So let's say I'm going to create a fake one now. So account, set type to prospect. Oh, I feel a bit nostalgic. It's been ages since I've done one of these, because we just don't use them much anymore. You've got two ways of running this rule. You can run it if your formula evaluates to true, and you can run it if the criteria are met. Samira asks, is there anything that a workflow rule can do that a process builder cannot? Yes, at the moment. So you can actually run a workflow rule to send an outbound message using the SOAP API. You can't do that with Process Builder. However, there is something called platform events, and platform events are much better than using outbound messages. It's basically a publisher and subscriber method of integrating. So you can actually, if you save a record, that creates a platform event that's called save, and then you can trigger workflows off of that, Process Builder off of that. Does that answer your question? Cool. So the criteria I'm going to use for this sample use case is just to say, so if I'm going to set the type to prospect, I want to make sure that the sum of opportunities is greater than 0, because that tells me there are opportunities on it. Now, there's a flaw in the plan. I would technically want to change my roll-up summary field to say sum of closed won opportunities and then set the type to customer. I just want to show the concept here. So if I create a record, or my account record is edited and now it meets the criteria, i.e. if I say close win or if I create an opportunity against it, then this rule is going to run, and it's going to check, is the sum of opportunities greater than 0? And I'm going to click save and next. Now, obviously you can use your and your or logic in here as well. You can make it quite fancy, but the next thing that you do here is you have the option to generate a new task, generate a new email alert, so that's automatically send an email to somebody, update another field, send a new outbound message, or attach an existing action to this workflow rule, which actually stops you just repeating the same actions over and over again. The other thing and this is one of the first things that I ever learned in Salesforce 12 years ago, was about time triggers. This is how you add a delay. So if you said to, and I've used this a few times with automatic emails and credit control as well. I once did some work for a ski chalet company, and they said they wanted 150 workflow rules. And I was like, no, please tell me you don't want 150 workflow rules. Tell me you're going to use like Marketing Cloud or something. No, we're going to use workflow rules, Gemma. And I was fine. Okay. So I had basically every single opportunity that was created to sell a holiday to a French alpine chalet. Every opportunity would automatically go into a queue, which was set by this workflow rule, so that, you know, after and on the opportunity there was a custom date field called holiday date, you know, first day of holiday. So they had rules whereby, you know, if the booking was made within, you know, if the booking was made 6 months prior to the date, then all opportunities would just go straight into a queue to be, you know, to receive reminder emails and information emails and credit control emails. So I also had some custom credit control fields, which was, you know, have they paid? Yes. When was the date that they were paid? Blah, blah, blah. Time triggers enabled me to say, right, when an opportunity is created and there is a date that exists, a start date of the holiday, then add a time trigger that, say, 6 weeks before the holiday date, if the payment status is not equal to paid, then send an email to the customer to say you need to pay. And then, but then obviously, if customers did pay, there was a process for the users to follow to go and update that payment status to paid, and that would make them drop out of the queue, if that makes any sense. So they wouldn't receive the email to remind them to pay. So there are lots of cool things you can add. You can use time triggers for. Another example we had a customer care plan. So we would have customers on a subscription. Every time an opportunity was closed won, that customer would be entered into the care plan. So there would be tasks generated at the 3-month point, the 6-month point, the 9-month point, for the salesperson to call them and see how they're getting on before it got to the renewal stage. So we would use time triggers to do that. So just use an example of updating the field then. So all we do here is just say we're going to create a new field update. Obviously, give in a name. So what I used to do was I got myself into a habit with naming conventions, and I just used to say type set to prospect. And then on here, you just select the field that you're going to update. Ta-da! And then you can choose whether you go a value below the current one or above the current one. I've rarely used those. I've tended to use specific values, and then you save it. And all's well that ends well, except for the fact that this workflow rule will not run because it's not been activated. So whenever I create an account record or find an account record and put an opportunity in, you know, it's not going to automatically set that rule. But if I activate it, let's go and give it a go, and I'll show you what it'll do. It's my favorite part when it runs correctly, but then my not so favorite part is the curse of the demo, that when it just doesn't work because you're showing someone. Now, just to make sure I don't get the curse of the demo, I am going to quickly use a list view to show all accounts. I love list views, they're so helpful. I'm going to pin it so I can get back to it later. And I'm going to add a field to it, which is my sum of opportunities, to make sure I don't end up with egg on my face. Wiggle, wiggle, that's it. So what I've got, so Salesforce has 0 opportunities on it. Now notice, you know, even though I've set that rule, all of these have a sum of opportunities greater than 0, right? And they still say customer direct. They will do because just because you've activated the rule doesn't mean that it will run. It will not run until I change some of these records. So if I change this account site, for example, and it didn't meet the thing is, this shouldn't update because it meets the criteria now. Yeah, whatever. Ugh. Bloody validation rules. Okay, but you see, you get the idea. So it wouldn't have changed because it currently meets the criteria, whereas this doesn't currently meet the criteria. So if I then go to Salesforce, let me check that there's no weird data going on here. So I think it wants account type, doesn't it? 9 employees, why not? Salesforce there, must be 8 characters long. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so it still doesn't meet the criteria because the sum of opportunities is 0. It's not greater than 0. So what will happen if I create an opportunity against it? Let's have a go. It should update the type to prospect. Update type to prospect, please. Set close date to tomorrow. Decision makers, why not? And let's save it. Okay, so it's created an opportunity. Now, what's going to happen when I look at details? Nothing. I need to refresh my screen, and that should now say prospect. Please work. This is when you just pray. Okay, so that's because the account hasn't updated. So what happens if I then put in a website and save it? Okay, so that's still not working. So evaluate the rule when the record is created and any time it's edited to subsequently meet the criteria. So let's have a look at the sum of opportunities. It's still 0. That's why, because I didn't put an amount on it. This is how we troubleshoot. We work backwards all the time. Think about what we've changed and think about what's supposed to happen logically. So now if I, so that still doesn't meet the criteria until I put an amount in. Let's hit save. So now that's says, yeah, and now you can see the type is updated to prospect. Woo! So that's just an example of what process automation can do in Salesforce automatically. Any questions on that so far from anybody before we move on to Process Builder? So key concepts, you write a rule, you activate the rule, and you define when the rule should run. So at what point do we evaluate whether the rule should run? What's the criteria for action? And then what is the action and where does it happen? Limitations of workflow rules is that you see a use case for using this instead of Process Builder or flows. Well, oh, you don't see a use case. Well, that's because this is now a legacy piece of functionality. It will be switched off at some point, I'm pretty sure. It's just that right now, there are still lots of legacy Salesforce orgs out there where people still have built these before over the last 20 years and still rely on it and haven't switched over yet. So you can't just switch these things off without warning. You've got to kind of, it's like with anything, it's change management. You've got to really, really spend time to convince people of the value of switching over. And that will take some time. So, yeah, so let's have a look at Process Builder. I personally fell in love with this when it came out. I just, oh my God, just, wow, look at all this stuff I can do. There is a video, so I'm going to give you a quick, I'm going to play that video really quickly to give you an overview. My daughter is suspiciously quiet. I hope she's okay. Oh, okay, maybe there isn't a video. It is private, so yeah, there's a man outside laughing at me. Okay, Salesforce Process Builder. That's a bit embarrassing, isn't it? Let's go here, Process Builder. I just want a short video, a short overview. Okay, I'll just do it. Sorry about that, everybody. So when you open up Process Builder, you're actually, believe it or not, looking at a different system. So when you need to come out of here, you have to click back to setup to get back. Now, to go back to Process Builder, there's a few concepts to understand. So the first thing that you need to do is to select your object as you would normally and give it a name first of give it a name first of all. Now there are some best practices around Process Builder. Salesforce doesn't like you having more than one process per object. However, there are some situations where you're going to have to do that because you will want a Process Builder to run only for newly created records instead of just created and edited. So let's use a very simple example here. I wonder if we can do it with the recruiting app stuff. Build a process for creating interviews. Yeah, let's have a go at doing this. I know we've got prerequisites. Oh, the work you do here builds the work you complete. Yeah, okay. Let's say, for example, I'm going to give it a go. Why not? Why not? Why not? So in this use case, we're going to look at our recruiting app. And I think I think let's just go through the motions of creating it. We can always check the challenges a little bit later. And I will put a link in for this, and we can go through and build this together, because this is going to be an easier way of understanding what we're doing, because I can speak to it going through. So up to this point, we know we've got interviewers, we've got positions, and we've got job applications. And one of the things that we can do to automate this is actually to automatically create interviewer records. Now, this is something that you can do in Process Builder that you just cannot do with workflows. So what we're going to do here is we are going to create a new interviewer record from the position. So to do that, what I like to do is, again, just prefix it with the name of the object. Create new interviewer record. If you want to follow along, you're more than welcome to. Then what we have to do is we have to decide our evaluation criteria. Remember, I talked about evaluation criteria. Do we run it when it's created? Do we run it when it's created or edited? Or do we run it when it's created, edited, and didn't meet the criteria before? With Process Builder, we have slightly different options. We can have, and they're explained in friendlier language. So we can actually run a process when the record changes. We can run the process when a platform event message is received. Remember, I talked about platform events. It's another way of integrating with other systems. You can have another system write into Salesforce, create a platform event message, or write that into Salesforce, and then you can have a process run off the back of that. Or you can actually daisy chain different processes together as well. So you would use option 3. So if you're saying that's if you want to create little sub processes as well that are potentially reusable. So we're just going to use a simple one here, so that when the record changes, and then you're invited to this interface here, where it's very visualized, and you can. Those of you who are familiar with business process diagrams might recognize some of the symbols used. If you're looking at a rectangle here, then this is telling you which object you're running this from. And bearing in mind, the limitations are you can only run this from one object at a time. But with Process Builder, you can cause updates to any related objects, which you couldn't do with workflows. Your second part is where you put your decision criteria. So it's showing as a rhombus symbol to indicate a decision. If your record meets the criteria that you set in here, then it follows this branch, this true branch here. And this is where you can, here is your immediate actions, and then your time-based actions, your scheduled actions. So remember about the case of the French Alpine chalet bookings, you could actually make the emails go off at certain times. Not that that's best practice, but if you had to, you could. So what you can then do is, once you have one set of criteria, you can then put in another and another until you tell the process to stop. Now, you're limited in the number of criteria that you can add in. I can't remember exactly what the limit is, but you can only go so far with it. When you've reached the point where you have exhausted your limits on the number of decision criteria you can add, that's when you need to start thinking about running a flow from a process builder. And a flow is where you can say, user puts in this, that then gets put into here, which then gets picked up by something over here, which then is evaluated by this decision, which then causes that to happen or that to happen. And it's a much more complicated, it's a much more logical way of running processes one after the other. So in this instance, our trailhead badge says we are going to create an interviewer record. So I'm going to go back to my setup and change the name. Oh, I didn't do that correctly. I'm going to do that through changing the properties of the rule instead. So notice when you come back here, you have your process that you've started, and each process has a version, the latest version. And it just, every time you make a change to it and save it, that's the current version. So you'll notice that, you know, as you go and you start working through your processes, it's actually easier to accept. It's easier to do and less disheartening if you accept that you're going to have to make multiple versions, because you'll be iterating through and trying to figure out which one works the best and testing it continuously. At least I hope you will be testing it continuously. I'm going to change my name, sorry. So what was the name? It was Create Interview Record. In fact, now one thing, so let me tell you where my head went then. I went to go and change the name, and then I remembered that the API name is fixed and you can't change it. So I'm going to go back to view all processes, and I'm going to delete this one, and I'm going to start a new one. Okay, so new, create interviewer record. Okay, and it starts when the record changes. So the first thing we have to do is we have to choose our object. Now this requirement is that we have to start this from a position. So from the position, we are going to take some information from the position, and we are going to use it to produce another record that is related to the position, which is the interviewer. So first of all, we have to say which object we're going to run this from. Now, when I click find an object, you'll notice pretty much any object in the system you can run automation from, even some of the system ones as well. So like an email message, you could have, and this is how I know that there's a company I'm a customer for, and this is how I know that they haven't got this set up, because I logged a case with them and was asking some questions, and I emailed back in, and the email message would have gone against the case, but they hadn't set up Process Builder to update the status of the case when the email message came in. So the agent had no idea that I was emailing in with responses. Whereas if that had been set up to be intuitive, then I would have set up a Process Builder that says when an email message comes in, change the status of its related case to needs attention, customers emailed back in. As it happened, I emailed in, and it felt like I was emailing into a black hole, because I ended up having to call them 3 days later, and I had no idea I'd emailed back in. So it's these simple things that, you know, you need to consider when you're building apps for people. So in this instance, we are going to be looking at the position. And I just realized I'm in the wrong org. Oh God, what a disaster. Let me open up the right org. Trailhead. Brave Wolf. Apologies, everybody, a little bit scatty today. She's a little bit slow as well today. Come on, come on, come on. Set up. And then process automation. That's all Process Builder. And it's called Create Interview Record. Starts when the record changes. Okay, so the object we're going to use is position. Again, I just like to type where we type in so that I can find things quickly, but you're more than welcome to scroll through if that's what your preference is. We are going to run this record whenever a record is created. So what that means is nothing, you create the position record. It's going to evaluate the criteria of the process builder. And if it meets the criteria, it will then go ahead to perform the action. So if we save that, notice now you've got the position there. So if you want to go and check again what's going on and change the criteria, you can. This is under the advanced menu. You've got you have actually got an option to enable recursion. And what recursion does is it says, okay, if I have once I've saved this record, do I want to then rerun the rule more than once during that single save? And that's important if you want to build in more decisions logic around that is based on what happens in step 1, for example. So let's say you set a checkbox field in step 1, and then you want to daisy chain another operation off the back of that, then you can use recursion to get the rule to run again to go and look for the next step based on that box being ticked. So I think I've used that once or twice with a customer when we were doing approval processes. So the next step is to add the criteria, and the criteria again needs a name. So the name that Trailhead would like us to use is called hiring manager not blank. This should be fairly familiar now, this kind of criteria interface where we actually define what's the field, what's the operator, and what's the value. The one thing we have got that's slightly different is this type. And you've also got these 3 options for execution as well. So you say to process builder, when do you want to evaluate this criteria? Similar to what we had with workflow rules. Do we evaluate this criteria when it, do we execute our actions based on all the conditions being met for the criteria? Or do we want to use a formula? Do we want to build in some more complicated logic? Or do we just want to run it for everything that goes through the process? And that one gets used quite often, and this one gets used quite often. The formula evaluates to true sometimes. I've sometimes used that. I've not used it very, very regularly, but there are occasions when you look at it and go, yeah, I'm going to need to do that because there's ands and ors and nests and ifs and all that kind of stuff that you need to think about. Then in your set conditions, this is where things get interesting, because you can choose your criteria based upon either the object you're already on or records that are objects that are related to this one. So remember when we did formula fields and we said you could pull down other fields? You could actually say if the position is related to a customer account, for example, so you could go to position, find the account, pull the account type in. So you can make it cross-object formula criteria. In this instance, we just want to make sure that the hiring manager is not blank. Now, with something else to note with Process Builder when you're selecting fields, if I put in hiring manager, there are kind of 2. Okay, that's interesting, because normally, okay, right. There are kind of 2 ways that relationships are represented in here. One is to show the object with the greater than symbol, which indicates that you can go through and get fields from that object. But what you may also find is here is your relationship field, which is on the position object. So this is the hiring manager relationship that's on the position. Now, if you're checking to make sure that that's got a record in it, or you want to evaluate it based on, does it include a 1, for example, then use this relationship field that's on the object. The reason I say that is because it actually improves performance, because the system doesn't then have to go through and look at another table. It just looks at this one table and finds that relationship. The time when I would use this hiring manager thing is when I have to go and find fields that are from the hiring manager's contact record. It just happens that I don't use a record. It just happens that I don't have to do that right now. So I'm going to actually find the relationship field for hiring manager, and I'm going to choose it. And all I want to do is make sure that there's some data in it. So if you look in the operators, you'll find that there are some different operators in there compared to what you would get in a formula field. Ugh, my tea's gone cold. You have equals, does not equal, starts with, ends with, contains, is changed. Is changed is interesting, because you could say if the hiring manager is changed, then run it again. Or is null, which means is blank. So we want to make sure that this hiring manager is not blank. So we're going to use the is null, and then we get to choose, is it true or false? This is where it's much more dynamic using the process builder than it is for workflow rules, because you can actually evaluate rules based on one field being equal to another field, which you couldn't have before. You could have one field being referenced as a formula, for example, and you can write your own formulae to calculate that. So if you were to say, for example, let's say you were calculating a per diem rate on an expense, and you wanted to go and check against a list of rates for different countries, then you could actually use a field reference and then go and find a field on a related object. So you could actually say if the position is equal to the same position as, you know, a related position, etc. You know, you could get interesting with that. For this instance, we just want to make sure that it is not blank. These kinds of criteria we come up against quite a lot, or we need to use quite a lot, because we have to remind the system of the situations where we have to remind the system that it should only run at certain times, and that can mean you have to go right down to a good level of detail. Like if we're going to send an email to a hiring manager, or we're going to create an interviewer, it doesn't make sense to do it if there's no interviewer on it, if there's no hiring manager on it. So we have to make sure that we account for these criteria. So as you can see, that's what we're having to do. That's what Trailhead's telling us to do here. Then you have your logic as well. So you can say run this rule, run the criteria based on all the conditions being met. So you can add more rows if you want to. You can base it on any of the conditions being met. So this or this or this or this, and you can also customize your logic just as you can with your list views. So you could do 1 and 2 or 3, 2 and 3 or 4, etc. As we've done before with our list views. So I'm just going to hit save. Now, Salesforce is pretty good at just saving as you go. So notice I don't have to press save on anything anymore, because it's all just saving in the background by itself. The next thing that we have to do is to actually add our actions. And in this action, what we're going to do is create a new record. But just to show you what are the types of actions that you can have. Remember, you can run actions immediately, or you can set a schedule and tell them to run at certain times based on logic. So the actions that you can do, as you can see, there are a hell of a lot more that you can do here. You can run some code. You can create a record. You can send an email automatically. You can run a flow. So if you want to kick off some additional logic, you can do that. If you want to automatically post to Chatter and mention somebody, you can do that. If you want to run another process, you can do that. If you want to run a quick action, you can do that. If there's some stuff you can do with Quip, which is an automatic document, it's a collaboration tool that Salesforce acquired a few years ago and has bolted in, which is a way of collaborating on documents. As you can see, I actually use it. So you can automate some actions there. You can have it generate its own Quip document for that customer. You could have it send a custom notification. You could submit a record for approval, or you could update existing records. And those records could be this record or any other records that are related to this one. Any questions so far? Okay, not yet. Listening intently. Fantastic. I've used different things to them. What have I done? Ah, okay, yes. So yeah, so if they did the global constant null thing, what did they do? Well, it just proves that just shows you that I do I do kind of know some stuff. No, but I'm joking, it's fine. So yeah, so they've done it slightly differently. I used is null, but what did they do? Let me have a look. They did yes. So position does not equal global constant null. Ah, okay. Yeah, they'll do the same thing though. Global constant null. Yeah, good point. So I'll leave it like that just because sometimes the checking mechanism can be quite fiddly. No, you're right, Kat. You're not pedantic. The checking mechanism can be really fiddly, but I mean, they do the same thing. It's just how I would do it. So adding the action, in this instance, we're going to create a record based off this one. And as with anything in Salesforce, give it a name. So the name that we have to give it is create interviewer record. And then what we have to do is select what type of record we're going to create. And this is where we choose. This is where we choose the object. Now, Natasha says, what is a global constant? Well, global constant is something that can be used across the whole system. So it's true or false, basically. So in this instance, we're going to create a new interviewer record, but we can generate any object we want, a record for any object we want here. We can even create background records. We can send email message. We can create email messages automatically. We can create feedback questions. You know, you can automate pretty much anything that you want here. We're going to automate the interviewer. And then here is where you set your fields. And there are certain fields that you will have to make sure that you add. So for example, if I was to select contact, a contact record won't be created unless it's got a last name. And you'll find that out when you try and test it. And it fails because no last name was given. Now, there are certain things as well. I've automated tasks on here as well. Let's have a look at that task. And it will actually give you the 3 fields that it needs to have populated in order to create the task, which is much better. That never used to happen. So that's the features that have just come in. Well, not just come in, but have come in since. So interviewer. So the fields that we're going to set, first of all, is we need to make sure that we set the position, right? So the position is where we this is where we can get a bit dynamic here and say, when we create this record, the position it needs to be related to is the position that started off this whole process. So we're going to use, so the types that you can set for this field are an ID, which is if you hard code an ID, not great, not very portable. A field reference, which is where you actually set it based on a field. The global constant, which is yes or no, blank. So you can set it to null if you want to, which is pointless. And then you've got a formula, and formula for a position, it could be, and in fact, I used to use this for project managers. Whenever I created a timesheet and I wanted to route it off to a project manager for approval, I used to use Process Builder to set a lookup field. Now, you couldn't do that with workflow rules. You couldn't set a lookup field at all. It would always be code. So the amount of triggers that there are existing in people's orgs that just set formula fields right now is lookup fields right now is insane, I'm sure. But for this use case, what I did was we had a lookup field on the project, and we had a timesheet that was also related to an assignment, which was related to a project. So I created a process builder that said, whenever you create a timesheet, look up to the assignment, then look through the assignment up to the project, and then look through the project to get the project manager's user ID, and then stamp it into this project manager user lookup field. because then I could use it in an approval process and route it off to the right person. But there were some instances where a project manager wasn't supposed to approve a timesheet. It had to be, for example, if it was vacation or some kind of time off, then you could have the system calculate if the project type is global or internal or holiday or sick or something like that. Go and get the manager field. Go and get the manager's user ID from the user who's doing the change or who owns the timesheet, and set that into the approver instead. That was a very common use case actually, that got used a lot. So in this instance, what does Trailhead want us to do? So first of all, we have to relate the employee field to the hiring manager. So let's do that first. So we're going to find a field called employee, and we are going to use a field reference to go and get the hiring manager's user ID and set that. So we're not going to use ID because we haven't got the person's ID, and we wouldn't want to use it because the ID will change between sandbox and production. So it's not good practice. We have to make it dynamic. So we're going to use this field reference option here, which is let's go and get the data that's in another field. So the employee field reference, we've got to go and get the hiring manager from the position. So we're already looking at the position object. So we're going to type for hiring. And then we're just going to get the ID. We don't want to necessarily have to go, you can go through here if you want, but I think that this field contains the ID that I want, so I'm just going to use that. And I happen to know that that's a user ID. Where you will get an error, this is where you have to be really, this is where you have to be knowledgeable about your data model as well, because if I happen to know that hiring manager is a contact record and not a user record, I then have to create a relationship between the contact and the user in order to go and get that data. There isn't a magnifying glass and lookup because it's using a different technology. This is all event-based architecture, so it's actually using JavaScript to look at that, as opposed to the traditional kind of web interface that we had before, or we have with formula fields and so on. So we're going to get the hiring manager. Let me just check what they're saying we need to do. So we've got to go to it's saying the same thing. That's fine. You could, I'm just saying that because you could go, it could be wanting you to go through and get the record ID here, for example. But again, that's got to go through two relationships, so there's a risk to performance there. So I'm just going to use hiring manager, the lookup field that's on the position object, and I'm going to choose that. Is everybody with me? Does everyone understand what's happening with this? Cool. I am a bit of a rambler, so apologies. And I'm thinking as I go. It does help that it's visual, yeah, because if I was just telling you this, you'd be like, what? So employee equals the hiring manager ID from the position. The second field that we have to set is the actual position, because at the moment, if this runs, it will just link it to the hiring manager. It won't link it to the position at all. So you have all these like orphan records with no relationship to positions at all. So for our second row, also think about the owner as well. Think about who's going to own that record. And but with interviews, I believe it's master details, so there is no owner, but that's just something, but do consider that as well. And I'm completely wrong because it's not master detail because there's an owner ID. Oh. So position, another field reference, because we need the position ID. So if you need the record ID itself, just type in the word ID and then have a look through and see what Salesforce gives you. So you have all the relationships created by, last modified by, owner ID, queue or user. A queue is like a distribution list. It's if you want to have a record owned by a group of people. So you can actually have it owned by a queue and then assign people to the queue. And then people just go and pick and choose what they want out of the queue. And then you have your actual IDs. So all we want is the position record ID. And hit choose. And save. Okay. Save, activate, and confirm. Let's do that. So activate, confirm. So what do we have to do to go and test? Can anyone remember? Make things, yes. And then curse the demo, yes. So our rule runs when you create the position record, correct? Is there anything else that is needed for that rule to run? It's right there on the screen. What's not blank? The hiring manager, correct. So let's go and have a go at this. So we're going to go and create a new position. In order to do this, I am going to go into my recruiting app. Which thankfully, because I did the trailhead yesterday, it should be fine. Okay, so positions. Let's go and create a new position. And the position that we have to create, we have to create a hiring manager user first. Oh, boring. Okay, let's do it. So back to setup. And we're going to go to our users. And we shall create a new user called Kathy Cooper. Kathy Cooper, your initials plus your favorite color. Right, okay. K Cooper at. So Kathy Cooper. Kathy. Or K Cooper, wasn't it? K Cooper at, what was the instruction? Your initials plus your favorite color, gbred.com. Gbred, nice. Nickname K Coop, and then she's a customer support manager. So we are going to give her the title. Customer support manager. Her role is customer support North America, and her user license is Salesforce platform and standard platform user. Now, platform users are slightly different. Platform users can use reports, dashboards, and every standard object except cases and opportunities. You generally assign users these kind of licenses if they're primarily going to be working with a custom app, like a recruiting app that doesn't use cases and opportunities. They're generally cheaper licenses as well, because they don't include a lot of the sales functionality. Now, we have to tick that she's a flow user, because if we don't, it's going to break when she tries to run the rule, because she won't have the permissions. So we're going to save, and that will generate a new password, and you'll get an email to say that you have this. So then what we want to do is we're going to create a new position of super support supervisor. So when we go back into front stage and we create a new position, whatever, click new. Now, this is going to be a non-technical position, because we don't need to be answering questions about operating systems and programming languages, etc. We just need to be recording this for non-technical. So we hit next, and then we're given all the fields that we created. So this one is Super Support Supervisor. And the department is support, obviously. Location is US. Hiring manager is our lovely friend, Kathy Cooper. Our job description, manage a team that fields inquiries and cases from customers. So I'm just copying that and putting that in the job description. And the pay grade is S200. S200. And then, of course, if you want to, you can add in some other information. So I hit save. Tempted to create this for my own company or package it up and install it. So then we save and we click the related tab. So now that we've saved that, we have created a new position with a hiring manager that is not blank. So what should we expect to see in the related list? Let's see. Boom. Here is our brand new interview record. If I click on it, there's Kathy Cooper and there's the position. Ta-da! Cool, huh? So it's even cooler when you start flying off invoices and you start flying off I don't know if you're being sarcastic or not now, but some of the coolest stuff that I've used Process Builder to produce, it has included purchase orders, goods receipts, AP vouchers, for whenever people put timesheets in, I can have it create a goods receipt against a purchase order. There's all kinds of cool stuff that you can do with Process Builder. But with great power comes great responsibility. Make sure that you're following the right best practices and that you've thought your solution through before you go ahead and create these. So let me just tell it to, have I done this before? Yeah, I think I have. To check here and verify the step. And we'll see if we really do have to complete the other badges first around security. Okay, so you're feeling proud of yourselves, because you should do. You have just cracked Process Builder. Shall we have a look at, let's have a look at another case. Let's have another go. Let's go to the quick start, Process Builder quick start. Okie doke. So for this one, this is a very short project, but we're going to do this one together. And I think you'll probably enjoy it. So I hope you've all got your Trailhead Playgrounds open. We're going to switch badges. I'm going to send you the link. We'll come back to the recruiting automation on Wednesday, because I want to do approval processes on Wednesday. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of homework around this. Okay, so we're going to create a new process on the account object. We are obviously, now that you've seen the power of Process Builder, we can go ahead and create something new for a company that does business with that changes its location. So this is just a simple way that you can automatically update the business address of all the people who work at that company, which is all of your contacts. So in this quick start, we're going to create a new process. Whenever the account billing address changes, we're going to update all of the contact records, and we don't need to write any code to do this. So when you're ready, open up your Process Builder. Don't forget to go backstage to open up that. And so if you're lost, if you want to know where to find it, you just go to Process Builder, start typing. And we're going to create a new process. Now, what object are we going to do this on? Okay, we're going to do this on the account. So the name of this process needs to be contact address change. So I'm going to type that in. Now, the reason that we have to do it on the account is because the process only starts when the billing address is actually changed. So we have to think very carefully about which object starts this process off. So when the record changes, we're going to run this rule. And the first thing we have to do is select the account object. So I just clicked in it once and started typing ACC just to find what I want. Some orgs you log into, there's hundreds of records, hundreds of objects. So I just find it easier to do that. We're going to run this rule when it's created or edited. Because obviously a billing address could change any time, not just when it's created, not just when a record is created. So we hit save. And then check your challenge. I love how this is just very, very, very step by step. So it's cool. The next thing we're going to do is create our criteria. So our process criteria, it's actually very limited. It's around the billing street itself. So what they're not checking to see, the rule itself is not checking to see if a city or the state or the postcode and zip code and the country have changed, but you can bake that in. You can add in several different layers to your logic, and you can put some ors in there. So for our criteria, we need to give it the name of address change. And we are going to just check if the billing street has been changed. So all I did was just click into the field here. And then you're straight away, you know that you've got a list of account fields to select from. So I'm just going to type in billing. And look at all of the options you've got here. But notice you can't actually do it based on a whole billing address. So for this instance, because it's a quick start, they've just given you the one field. Check if the street has changed. What I would then do if this is real life is I would go in and add a second row and a third row and a fourth row, and I would actually go and get the billing state and choose that. You don't have to follow along. I'm just showing you. And then I would go and get the billing city. Then I would go and get the billing zip. And then I would also go and get the billing country. So you see how that's like 5 fields. Address fields, standard address fields in Salesforce are kind of special. They are actually a group of fields that are displayed as one in the UX. So what I would then be doing is saying, using the operator is changed equals true. Is changed equals true all the way down. Please, you don't have to follow along. You only need the street for this trailhead badge, but I'm just showing you what I would do for real life. So is changed equals true. Is changed equals true. Yeah, fiddly and boring, but once it's done, it's done. There, is changed equals true. And then what I would do is use this second condition if any of the conditions are met. And that covers any kind of address change whatsoever. And so you can make sure that it gets copied down to the contacts correctly. Now, for this instance, we are only doing the street, which I've just deleted. There's no undo button in Process Builder, by the way, sadly. So you have to have your wits about you. Billing street is changed equals true. When you are happy with that, you just save it and then check your challenge. And when you're ready, go to your process action section. Now, what we're going to do for this bit is we're going to use the update records function. Remember, we used create records before. We're going to use update this time. So we're going to, for our action name, we're going to call it update contact addresses. So add action, select the type, which is update records, and update contact addresses. And what we're going to do is we're going to find the record that we're going to update. We've got two options. Select the account record that started the process. That's if you want to do a single object update. So if this happens in this field, then update the other. Or you can say update records that are related to this account. So if you hit, we're going to choose option 2. And then in the list, if we click on the drop down, we will be able to find contacts. Yes. Cool. Just checking. Hit contacts. So this will go and get all the contacts that are related to the account. Now, what you can then do is say, which contacts do I want to go and get? Do I want to get every single contact, or do I just want active contacts, for example, or contacts that are not marked as deceased? And you can create criteria for updating these records. And you can see it defaults to no criteria. So this is just update all contacts related to this account. But when you change the updated records meet all conditions, you can then add the conditions that you want to put in there. So we're just going to use the no criteria. And we're going to set the new records, the new fields with the data that's in the billing street. So on the contact, that happens to be known as the mailing address. So you're given on accounts, the addresses are set up as billing address and shipping address. Any other addresses that you want to put on there, you've got to create text fields. Although there is an idea that's been voted, that's open for prioritization around creating address fields. On the contact record, your address fields are mailing address and other address. So we just need to, and it's split out exactly the same way. So we just need to set the mailing street with the value that's in the billing street. And you notice you get 2. So if you put in street, you've got mailing and other. So just going to click mailing street. This is where you can set what's known as a literal value. So if you wanted to say for every single time that you change the account and the billing street, then set the mailing street. If you set it with a string or a literal value, that's where you could say, 1 Buckingham Palace Road. What that means is every single time you change a billing street on an account, all of its contacts, mailing streets, are going to be set to 1 Buckingham Palace Road. We don't want that to happen. We want to use a field reference here because we want to go and get the billing street. So we set field reference, and then we say we'll go and find a field. Oh, look, there's the account that it's related to. So what field do we want? We want the billing street. So we choose that and we save it. Done. So then we activate our rule. Don't forget to activate it. The amount of times I've seen people forget to activate it and they're going, oh, it's not working. And then when you're ready, just make sure that you check your challenge. Now, once this has been activated, if you then want to go back and change it, you can't. It's locked. What you have to do is clone it and create a new version that you can then work on to make changes. And this is why you end up with several versions while you're going through and creating new versions and testing them. And inevitably something will break until it stops breaking. And then the cool thing is as well is when you're working on this in a sandbox, I've had processes that have gone through like 20 iterations, and then when it's time to deploy it to production, I add it to my change set and it's put into production as version 1. So it's not nobody's going to think any less of you for having lots of versions, and no one's going to judge requirements and ability based on the number of versions. So don't you worry. So let's test this. So we're going to go and find an account, and we are going to go and change the the billing street. So we'll find an account that's got contacts on it. And I'm going to do that actually by going to the Contacts tab, finding a contact and clicking on its account rather than hunting around. So contacts. Why don't we look at United Oil and Gas Corp, because we've got a few contacts on there, haven't we? So we've got at least 4. Yes, we have 4. So I'm going to open up the Lauren Boyle and the Avi Green records in new tabs, and I'm going to go and change the account billing street. So let's have a quick look at what it says now and what the contact record mailing streets say, just for comparison. So into the contacts, wakey, and then click on details. And what have we got? We've got 1304 Avenue of the Americas, New York. Do we have the same for our other contacts? Let's have a look. Avi, isn't it? Or Avi Green. Avi Green. 1302 Avenue of the Americas. Are we ready for this? This is so cool. I love this. Proper nerd. Billing address. That says 1304, and that says 1301. Ooh. Right, let's change the billing street. So let's say 10 Downing Street. And save it. Then it goes away and it's saved. So what we should see for Lauren and Avi is an updated mailing address. Now we won't see it without refreshing the screen. Because it's actually made a change to the data in the database behind. It is a little bit slow today. Oh, look, 10 Downing Street. Let's look at Avi. Oh, look, 10 Downing Street. So the account number is not numeric. That's your validation rules. So it's got to be 8 characters and and they've all got to be numbers. You just made some numbers up. Cool. Okay. So you can see that the data's been automatically updated, which is so cool. So make sure you check your challenge. And we just did the final part, which was testing the process. Note the mailing address and the account name. Yeah. Okay. Change the billing street address. Do it. Done. Right, everybody. So how do we feel about this. Is it all making sense? Is there any feedback or comments on this at all? This is great. Yeah, it is great. It's very cool. Yes. So apologies if Trailhead is being a little bit slow. Okay, so Jeremy, if you're feeling a bit confused, feel free to come off mute. If you have any questions, do ask. You know, if there's anything you want me to go over again, I'm happy to do it. And you just want to practice, okay, no problem at all. Let me think. Do we want to go through? It'd be good to write the process in Lucidchart before coming to Process Builder. Yes. Once you become more familiar with it, you'll find that actually plotting it out does make a big difference for sure. Definitely. Can we provide real life examples for a process that is not triggered when a record changes? Processes that are not triggered when a record changes. So you mean processes that are perhaps called by other processes? Or processes that are called by platform events? Sure, I can see if I can find some. When you first set up the process, the first screen, there are 3 choices. Yes, absolutely. Yes, no, I understand. Platform event process builder example. Okay. So we go back to our old friend, the Google. Define and publish platform events. So on Automation Champion, which is a really useful blog, there is actually a post that's all about this from Rakesh, who has, okay, so he's writing about Winter 18 release here. That's not really, it's very, very helpful. It's just trying to find a use case. With that, I would have to talk you through platform events in order to do that at this stage. And the other option is, of course, you can daisy chain different processes together. I've not seen them very commonly used, but there are others who use them all the time. So again, you are, what I can do as an action is take that away and find some more use cases, if that helps, Samira. It's just, in most instances, you'll be kicking these process builders off whenever records are changed. Okay. So something, I mean, what there is a, so let me just explain something else as well. So this is the developer guide. And one of the things that you can do is you can actually publish event messages from a Salesforce app. So, which would be a good one to play with, actually, I think. You could actually set, so this is, for example, publishing so this is an example of a printer. So if a printer has got a low level of ink, you can actually have it talk to Salesforce and publish an event message using a platform event, and then actually have automations happen off the back of that. So we've got sort of 20 minutes left. I actually think that I've come to a logical stop point. So if everybody is okay with that, I'll let you walk away and digest that. We finished a little bit early. I will post the homework onto the site tonight. So if you could take a look at that and finish off the 2 modules for the recruiting app. And then on Wednesday, we'll run through the rest of that recruiting app automation module and start working on approval processes. Is that all right with everybody? So do feel free to drop if you would like to. If you'd like to stay on and ask questions, then you're most welcome to. Okay. Oh my goodness. Yeah, Jamie, you can ask here. Feel free, just come off mute. That's fine. One badge away from Mountaineer. Oh my goodness. That's very cool. Thanks everybody for coming. I'm going to switch the recording off now.